People, what is your most disturbing, bone-chilling, or creepy story that's ever happened to you? Story 1. This is the story of In high school, I had a good friend named Steve. One day during freshman year, around 2007, he told our group about a strange experience that happened to his brother Tim a couple of years earlier. Tim went to college somewhere in New Hampshire. One night, around 2 a.m., and Tim and a good friend decided they needed Dunkin' Donuts, even though the nearest Dunkin' Donuts was across state lines. I don't know much about New Hampshire's geography, but I am told this trip involved driving through a narrow highway surrounded by woods. On the way back, a mysterious car pulled in front of them on the highway. It was a red compact car with its markings scratched off, and the only defining feature was its license plate, bearing a black O and a green M. From here on, we'll call it OM. Around this time, Tim described a few odd coincidences: his phone losing service, and the jazz station suddenly playing Smells Like Teen Spirit. I'll admit, those might just have been coincidences. Tim and his friend began sensing some bad juju from so Tim eased off the gas, hoping would pass. But wasn't done. As soon as Tim slowed down, did the same. Tim thought this was strange, but figured if he floored it, he could get around Yet, when Tim sped up, so did Tim and company were freaking out at this point, and had no idea what they were dealing with, but they saw a curve in the road up ahead. They saw go around it and decided to just stop. Their adrenaline was pumping and they weren't sure how long they sat there, but after what felt like 20 minutes, they worked up the courage to continue on their way. Maybe would have mercy on them. But as soon as they got around the corner, was there, the exact same distance as they last saw him, matching their speed. Clearly had no mercy. Tim and his friend were rightfully scared for their lives and relented to just going forward, hoping they could get out alive. Eventually, there was a fork in the highway. One led toward the college town, while the other led further into the woods. Our heroes went home while ventured into the unknown. Tim never saw again. Epilogue 1. I was told this story my freshman year, and was convinced it didn't happen. Even my buddy Steve wasn't exactly sure of its veracity. But around 2008 to 2009, I was listening to the local talk radio station while doing homework, and heard a news bulletin. There had been a murder in a neighboring county the previous night, and the sole witness saw a car leaving the scene. She described it as a red compact car with a license plate that had a black O and a green M. I nearly crapped myself. I am in suburban Orange County, California. What the heck is doing all the way over here? Maybe I was just hearing things. I ran into Steve the next day at school, and he had heard the same report. We learned two things: 1, neither of us were crazy, and 2, that was real as hell. Epilogue 2. This previous May, my friend Blake was on his way home from dropping off his girlfriend around 2 a.m. For some reason, he decided to take a highway that leads through a canyon. While driving along, a car pulled in front of him. It was a red compact car, with a license plate that had a black O and a green M. Blake was familiar with the stories and became rightfully scared. He fell as far behind as would let him. When they reached near the end of the canyon, did a U-turn and went back, while Blake continued home to change his pants and sleep. Epilogue 3. This is not the first time I posted this story. In a previous thread, someone posted their own sighting. That is all I know about I am thoroughly convinced he's a cross-country serial killer who crosses state lines to confuse the police, but I admit it's only conjecture. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. My mother told me this not too long ago, but it happened about 10 years ago. When my cousin was 17 or 18, she was in a car crash and passed away a couple of weeks later in the hospital. She was really close to my dad's sister, our aunt, and used to babysit her kids, who were no older than 4, all the time. Our aunt's house was under construction just before my cousin passed away, and the work continued after she died. One day, while my aunt was at work, she got a phone call from one of the construction workers complaining about a teenage girl who kept showing up at the house and walking around. He said the girl had been appearing several times over a few weeks. My aunt asked for a description to see if she knew her from around the neighborhood, and sure enough, it perfectly matched my cousin who had died a few weeks earlier. long brown hair, red baseball cap, denim dungarees, and a white jacket. When my aunt got home, she showed the workers a picture of my cousin, and they all agreed it was the girl they had seen walking around the site. This story really freaked me out when I heard it because our family was never one to believe in anything paranormal or have any paranormal experiences before. Story 3. When I was in high school, I had a really good friend who lived next door to a house that was always up for sale. People would move out in the middle of the night without a word, and it hadn't had the same owner for more than 6 months straight for a couple of years. One night, we were really bored, and he suggested we go explore the house next door since it had sat empty for a while. We went around back and there was a dog door he could crawl through. He unlocked the door and let me in. The house itself was really unremarkable. It looked like it was built sometime in the 1950s and was a craftsman-style home in an older, nicer part of town. My friend's house was similarly built. The kitchen had a really nice built-in breakfast table set against a picture window. The house's electricity was off, but you could see the streetlight through the window. My friend and I sat down on the floor across from the table, just hanging out and talking. Why? Who knows? All of a sudden, my friend screamed, and in that instant, my vision went black. But it wasn't just that I couldn't see. My whole body was engulfed in a sickly coldness from head to toe. I started screaming and felt my friend's hand grabbing mine and pulling me forcefully in some direction. My vision slowly came back, and I began to warm up when I realized we were outside under the streetlight. It was December, and it should have been much warmer inside that house. Finally, I looked at my friend, and he looked scared. I was really confused and kind of panicked myself, so I finally asked him what had happened. He said that as I was talking, a black thing, this figure that was all black and only vaguely shaped like a girl, crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. Apparently, I started groping around with my eyes wide open like I couldn't see, and he was so freaked out he pulled me out of the house. We're still friends and bring it up every now and then, but the story itself never changes, and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never felt such blackness or coldness in my life. It was palpable, almost sticky. For a couple of days afterward, I couldn't shake this unsettling feeling, and I could never walk past that house again. Ugh, I am scared to get out of bed now. Story 4. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear someone walking upstairs. It starts at one side of the room, casually walks to the other, and then stops. This usually happens maybe twice a night. I didn't start hearing it until I was 14, when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor, because they began sleeping in separate bedrooms. Regardless, both of their rooms are also on the first floor. For a little backstory, I've always been afraid of the upstairs at their house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out, and I refuse to ever go up there alone. I am 23 now and still won't go up alone. There's one room specifically that scares me. It's a long, narrow bedroom. When you open the door, there are closets on your left and right, a bed placed roughly in the middle of the room, and a window on the far side opposite the door. Growing up, my grandparents told me that the sons of the previous owner claimed to see a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and then go back into the closet. I thought nothing of this story until I had to start sleeping in the other room, the one located directly below that scary room upstairs. So, we all go to bed. All the lights in the house are off, and I am still awake, lying on the bed. Then I hear it. Thump, 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 starting at one end of the room upstairs. It gets closer to me, passes right above me, and continues to the other end of the room, where it stops. I am wide awake, terrified, out of my mind. There's no question in my mind that I heard footsteps. I knew that slow, casual pace. I was freaked out and went to my grandpa's room. I told him what I heard, and he said the house is old and it creaks. But he turned the dining room light on for me, so I felt a little safer. I tried going back to sleep. Then it started again, this time from where it had ended the first time, by the window upstairs. It walked over me again and stopped when it reached the door. I thought it was over, until 5 seconds later when I heard it coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silence as it reached the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and silence again as it reached the first floor. I was frozen in shock. Whatever it was on my floor of the house and sadly unaffected by the dining room light. I was staring at the doorway to my room, the dining room light shining in, and my vision began to distort. I felt dizzy with fear, so I pulled the blankets over my head and suddenly heard a scratching sound from inside my room. I knew exactly where the scratching was coming from. My grandpa's gun case. It was a very distinct sound. Long scratches down the front of the wooden door. I could even hear the door lightly tapping against the frame with each scratch. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. After a moment, I took a deep breath and let out a loud scream. Within seconds, my grandpa was at my door and I felt relieved. Needless to say, he still didn't believe me. So, I did what any normal person would do. I draped a sheet over the side of the bed and slept underneath it. I wrapped myself tightly in a comforter, put on headphones, and turned my back to the door. There could be a party of ghosts in my room, and I wouldn't even know. The next morning, my grandpa told my grandma what happened the night before. She said, "Oh, that's silly. You know your cousin woke me up the last time she stayed here. She came into my room saying, 'Thies, I hear footsteps.' I slept under the bed for the rest of my week-long stay with them. I've stayed there countless times since, and I hear the footsteps every time. I sleep on top of the bed now, but keep my back to the door and wear headphones. I haven't heard the footsteps coming down the stairs since that first night, but if I do, I don't want to know." Story 5. When we first moved into the house I grew up in, I used to hear things calling my name from the opposite end of the house. Like I would be in my room playing with Legos or something, and I'd hear my dad call my name from his room. So, I'd go to my parents' bedroom and ask what they wanted, and they'd always tell me they never called my name. Being a little kid, I honestly started to think they were playing a joke on me, because this happened about once every couple of days. Well, one night it happened again, and I went to ask them what they wanted, like always. But right as I stepped into their room, I heard my mom's voice calling for me from the living room, all the way on the other side of the house. At that exact moment, I knew no one was tricking me because I was looking at both my parents sitting right in front of me. I kind of kept this to myself until my brother was diagnosed with partial narcolepsy. One of the symptoms is apparently auroral hallucinations, so I thought maybe I had it too. I went and got checked, completely fine. So, I have no idea what was calling my name all those years, and I still hear it at night whenever I visit and stay over. Story 6. This isn't about me, but my sister. Growing up, she had an imaginary friend. She said it was an older lady named E.E. who was nice. My sister talked to her and played with her until she was about 4, and then it stopped. Fast forward to when my sister was about 10. My mom wasn't home. She had to go to the nursing home for grandpa, so she left with my dad. My sister and I shared a room at the time. She was in there doing whatever, and I was on the other side of the house. Suddenly, I heard the radio in our room click on, turn all the way up, then all the way down, and then go off. This happened 3 times. I went in there and said, "What the hell, kid? Knock it off." But she was sitting there, pale as a ghost. I went to unplug the radio, but there was no plug, no batteries. It was the only radio in the house. I looked at her, and she said, "It was E.E. I saw her. It was E.E." I called Mom, freaking out, and she was very upset. Apparently, Grandpa had just passed away. I dropped it. A few days later at the funeral, a relative gave us a picture she found. My sister said, "Hey, it's E.E. It was a picture of my grandparents when they got married. My grandmother died before I was born, when my mom was 11. We live in the house my mom grew up in. We have no pictures of my grandmother because my step-grandmother got rid of them all when she moved in a few years after my grandmother's death." Story 7. About a month ago, I went over to my girlfriend's house. I felt really uneasy when I entered the living room. It turned out they had replaced a china cabinet with one that belonged to her grandmother, who passed away a few months ago. Her grandmother had been bedridden in the hospital, and I never got to meet her. I felt uneasy the whole time. Being around her grandmother's furniture made me anxious and almost sad. When I told my girlfriend, she said it was probably nothing and went to the bathroom. I walked over to the cabinet. It was about 6 feet tall, made of dark wood, with 2 doors on the sides and glass up front. A mirror covered the back. I was looking at the teacups and small baby dolls when I swore I saw someone's silhouette in the mirror behind me. I called out to my girlfriend. At that moment, I heard a shrill screech from the bathroom. I started pounding on the door. It opened, and she was sitting on the floor crying. She said she saw someone in the bathroom mirror. We booked it out of her house. No shoes, no jacket, nothing. Straight to my car. I drove for about an hour or so with no destination. When I returned her to her house, her mom was sitting on the doorstep. She said she kept seeing shadows move. Nope. I'll go out of my way to make things like this happen. If someone claims their house is haunted, I want to see. If someone says they think they saw a skinwalker, my friends and I start looking. I've never found anything. But this was something else. Story 8. When I was a child, I lived in an old Victorian house, and I would always hear laughter while trying to sleep. I was an only child with a single mother, and when I was about 5 or 6, I would wake up in the middle of the night, hearing laughter in the hallway. After mentioning it to my mom, she swore it was probably just the TV being left on late. One night, I woke up hearing the laughter inside my room. I tried to sit up, but felt like someone was holding my shoulders down, invisible hands gripping my shoulders as I heard the laughter. I screamed my little heart out. My mom ran into my room and flicked on the bedside lamp, trying to convince me it was just a dream, until I said, "But my shoulders hurt." She lifted my t-shirt, and there were 2 adult-sized handprints on my shoulders. I honestly thought I had imagined it, and that it never happened, but the other day I mentioned it in passing to my mom, and she went completely white and said, "I don't want to remember that." Story 9. A Ouija board correctly predicted my dad's friend's death, and later my dad saw his ghost. This one happened to my dad when he was a teenager. I am not sure if it's true, but he avoids Ouija boards like the plague and almost begs people never to use one. He lived in the middle of a huge city, and the neighborhood wasn't a great place. He and 2 friends, let's call them Jake and Kyle, used to hang out in graveyards and attempt little seances. Yeah, it was a stupid thing to do, but they never got anything out of it. There was a spot in the main cemetery where they'd meet up occasionally. It was like their secret place to escape reality and just hang out together. It was on their way home from school, so it was never out of the way, except that Kyle usually drove. One night, they decided to use a Ouija board and ask it some random questions. One of them was when Jake would die. The board answered with 1 week. They just laughed it off and went back to their usual lives. Then, one day after school, about a week later, my dad walked to that spot to see if his friends were there. He saw Jake standing there in a panic. My dad ran up to him and asked what was wrong. Jake, waiting for him, said something like, "Kyle got in a bad car accident. I think he's dead. Run to his house and tell his parents." My dad booked it to Kyle's house and saw 2 cop cars parked on the curb. He ran inside and yelled, "Hey, I heard Kyle was hurt. Where is he? Is he all right?" I saw Jake in the graveyard, and he told me Kyle was in a car accident. Then he noticed Kyle standing right there with minor bruises. Kyle, his parents, and the cops just stared at him. Kyle said, confused, "You saw who in the graveyard?" It turned out that a car accident had indeed occurred. Jake had decided to ride home with Kyle, and someone else hit them on the way. Kyle was fine, but Jake took the full hit. The Ouija board was right, after all. Story 10. A few years ago, I was walking through the woods, slightly off the beaten track, when I noticed a really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look and found a dead body. The guy had clearly been there for a while and wasn't looking great, swollen, green, and black with various runny bits. The local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I called the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took a while for them to get there, and it got dark. I was just sitting there in the dark with him for a long time. It turned out he had offed himself. For a long time afterwards, I had dreams about him, and he would talk to me, nothing pleasant. Mostly, he was angry that I had disturbed his resting place and said he wanted me to off myself. Probably just my imagination, but it was all pretty disturbing at the time. He still shows up in my dreams from time to time, and no doubt will tonight after typing this. Story 11. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion pretty late at night, and the drive was about 2 hours. I didn't stay the night because I had to be back for work the following day. Most of the drive was on roads lined with dense bushes and trees on either side, the really creepy kind you see a lot in movies. Anyway, I had been driving for about 45 minutes when I started to get really tired. You know how sometimes you suddenly become exhausted out of nowhere? Well, that happened to me. I knew I wasn't going to last much longer, but I hadn't come across any place where I felt I could safely park and sleep. Anyway, after it became clear to me that I wasn't going to find a place to pull over, and my tiredness wasn't going away, I did something very questionable. I pulled off to the side of the road onto the grass, behind some bushes, trying to hide my car from anyone else who might come past. The roads weren't empty. I was seeing another car every few minutes or so. I made a mental note that the time was 11:22, and then I fell asleep. Some time later, I was awoken by a scratching sound. I looked at the clock. It was 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds, and since I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother looking around and simply went back to sleep. I was later awoken by the same sound, and this time it was 12:40. This time it really freaked me out because the sound didn't stop. The thought crossed my mind that it might just be an animal inspecting the car, but why would it return almost an hour after it had left the first time? I looked in my rearview mirror and just managed to catch a glimpse of something running away into the forest. At the time, I thought it was the damn hook killer, the one that scratched that couple's car and then slaughtered the guy when he got out to investigate. Screw that, I thought to myself, so I got the hell out of there. There was a bend no more than 100 yards up the road, and as I came around it, there was a frigging car parked off to the side of the road with the driver's side door open. I slowed down just to look and see if anyone was in there. There wasn't. Then I looked in my rearview mirror. I didn't see anything, and all of a sudden, this guy comes sprinting around the corner. He starts screaming at me, shouting stuff like, hey you, get the hell out of your car, now." I noped the F out of there and sped off. I never saw the guy again. Moral of the story? Don't frigging sleep on the side of a deserted road. Story 12. A few summers ago, I went for a bike ride around midnight with a friend. We went our separate ways at the end of the evening, and I had about 2 blocks to ride back by myself. Because of construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk. The streets were dead, so it wasn't a problem, at least not until I was about to turn left onto my street. There was a man walking alone, maybe in his 40s, a little scruffy but not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow, and I didn't want to freak him out, so when I got about 6 feet behind him, I said, "Hey, behind you." He turned around and gave me this super angry look. I turned down my street, and he started to follow me, literally screaming about how I was a frigging wussy and that he was going to end me and all that. I live right off the corner, and I didn't want him to figure that out, so I decided to do another loop around the block. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that when I looped back around and looked down the street, I saw him standing on my frigging front stoop, staring out at the road like the mother gucker knew I lived there. He saw me ride by again, but didn't say anything. I ended up going back to my friend's place, but my bike was stolen from the alleyway by the house 2 days later. Edit. The guy in question was definitely not actually homeless. We have a large population of mentally ill individuals in that area, downtown of a medium-sized city, so if I hadn't thought the sidewalk was too narrow to pass, I wouldn't have disturbed him. Half the scary part was that he looked completely normal for my area. That being said, I texted my mom, and she made the decision not to notify law enforcement until my bike was stolen. Story 13. I had awesome parents who let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights when I was very young, since my sister was a light sleeper and I could stay up until dawn. But of course I always ended up falling asleep on the couch because Nick at night made me tired. So one night I wake up with that prickly feeling like an instinct. I just bolt upright and stare out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, so you can imagine the sheer number of trees. In the perfect light cast by the moon, I see the silhouette of someone in one of those trees. The family dog runs to the window and starts snarling into the glass. Terrified, I ran into my parents' room and tried to explain that there was a strange person outside. Dad grabbed something defensive, and darted outside with the dogs, ready to beat the wax off the hothead. I trembled in Mama's arms until Dad came back and said he saw no one and told me to go to bed. I decided to sleep in my regular bedroom. I filled my sister in on what had happened. Dad was making regular rounds through the house with a cup of coffee. We were all still, and I finally thought, I can sleep now. Nope. I noticed the man outside my window. From what I could see in the moonlight, he gave me a shush signal and then ran away, just turned and sprinted in a straight line. I swear I couldn't stop crying for what felt like hours. Story 14. My house sits farther back on the lot than most others. It has a strange layout. The sidewalk runs the length of the living room and ends at the front porch, which leads directly into the living room. Large windows that don't open let in plenty of light, but at the cost of no privacy. The rest of my family was on vacation, and having the house to myself, I decided I would get smashed. Well, I passed out on the couch in the living room at about 9, only to wake up realizing I was too scared to walk back to my room. The couch is right underneath those big windows. I woke up suddenly, not knowing why. I had a severe case of the chills and couldn't figure out the reason. Then the banging started. It came from right above me. I didn't move, but I opened my eyes and looked up at the window. Someone was standing there, pounding on the glass. Without moving, I glanced at the cable box. It was around 3 in the morning. The banging continued. Then it stopped suddenly, but I still didn't move. Suddenly, it started again, this time coming from 2 different directions. Someone was banging on the window, and another person was banging on the front door. They kept it up and wouldn't go away. Finally, after about 40 minutes, they quit. It was the most terrifying event I can recall at the moment. It left me a nervous wreck after that. I called a friend the next day to see if he would come over and stay for the rest of the week, and his response was, "What the hell for? So that we can both be murdered in our sleep? Thanks a lot, a-hole." Story 15. I was 17 and had just gotten my license. Back in high school, my friends and I made it a mission to find abandoned houses to throw parties in. We had a few good candidates, but the motherlode was this house I would pass on my way home from work. It was an undeveloped shell of a huge home with a large property in the back. I told one of my friends about it, and one day before we went to see a movie, I took him to the house. It was about dusk in summer, so I had my headlights on. I pulled into the front of the house, and we were there for like 10 seconds tops before I pulled back out to head to the main road. A minute later, a big truck pulled up behind us with its high beams on, riding our ass. My friend and I took note, but paid it no mind as we headed back to the main road. At the light, I turned right, but the truck cut through the gas station at the corner and blocked us off. Out of the truck comes this big hulk of a man, and my friend and I were crapping our pants. He rapped on the window, and I rolled it down. Now, the really freaky part was that this was a busy road, and suddenly there was no one else in sight. He asked what we were doing at the house, and I quickly lied, saying we were making a U-turn. He stared at us for a few seconds, smiled, and sent us on our way. To this day, the house remains unfinished, and I am convinced it's some kind of drug operation. Story 16. When I was about 10, all of my cousins and siblings were over, about 10 of us in total. The parents and grandparents were out for an adult dinner, so it was just us kids sitting around watching a few movies when suddenly the house shook, and there was a large flash coming from the backyard. It felt like a bomb had dropped. We all heard it, felt it, and saw it. As a pack, we ran into the hallway. The eldest cousins debated calling the police but decided to call the parents instead. After a few minutes, we gathered our courage and ventured back into the living room, this time armed with weapons just in case. After about half an hour, with no other incidents, the parents came home and thought we were insane. There was nothing wrong in the backyard, and no neighbors reported anything. It's been 10 years, and we still talk about it, trying to figure out what it was. That has been the scariest thing to happen to me by far. Story 17. Okay, so this happened to me last summer when I was back at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 in the morning and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. That was already a little weird, since her room is just down the hallway from mine and she could have just come into my room. I went to pick up, but the call ended as soon as I reached the phone. I figured she wanted to speak with me, so I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached her door, she started screaming that someone was in the room with her. I busted in, and of course, nobody was there. After she stopped crying, she told me she had woken up and seen a dark shadow just centimeters from her face. That's when she screamed. I told her she had called me, but she said her phone wasn't in her room and that she had been sleeping. Sure enough, her phone was downstairs in her purse. The weird part is that I have the log of her call on my phone, but she doesn't. I've never managed to explain this one. Story 18. This isn't supernatural creepy, but it's one of the most disturbing and surreal experiences of my life. One early morning a few years ago, I was walking to my bus stop, eating a banana. It was dark and misty, around 5 a.m., and I was internally debating something trivial like whether I wanted my daily Starbucks before or after the commute. As I approached the dimly lit corner on my street, a tall man in a black mask stepped out of the dark alleyway to my left, sleepy and disoriented. I barely acknowledged him. Then he shouted, "Put down your frigging purse," and pointed a gun at my head. That's when things started to click. He said, "Put down your bags," and I told him, okay, I am putting them down over here." He ordered me to walk toward him, into the alley, and get down on the frigging ground. I agreed. "I am coming." Okay. My heart was pounding a million miles a minute, and my hands still smelled sticky from the banana. I knew I needed to get away. I don't know why, but my mouth wouldn't stop moving. "Look, see, I am on the ground. My stuff is over there. Please just take my stuff." But he didn't like that. "Shut the F up, okay?" He got on top of me and put the gun to my head. At this point, I should mention I was on my way to coach a high school practice, dressed like a dude, huge baggy pants, hat, jacket. If not for my voice, I'd look like a prepubescent 90s rap star. Anyway, as the guy got on top of me with the gun to my head, he looked at me and paused. I can't explain how I knew, but I swear at that moment it clicked for him that I am a woman. He got off me, stood up, and pointed down the dark alley. "Come with me." My stomach hurt. I remembered there had been a recent rash of sexual assaults in my neighborhood, during the daytime no less. When he pointed down that dirty alley, my internal voice screamed at me. Voice 1 said, "There's no way in hell you're going down there without a fight." Voice 2 replied, "But he has a gun, you dong head." Then the real voice, his voice, hollered, "Frigging follow me." So I do what I do best. I talk. "I am coming. I am following you." I call out. The man makes a crucial mistake. He believes me. I take 1-2 tiny steps backward, toward the sidewalk. He turns his body and his gun toward the alley. This is my moment. I take a deep breath, tuck my head down in case he starts shooting, and start sprinting away. I hear a voice screaming in a high-pitched wail before I realize it's mine. After running 6 or 7 blocks, I head back to my apartment, hoping he's not there to see where I live. The police checked out the alleyway an hour later, but the potential attacker was long gone. The only evidence of the encounter was my banana peel browning in the alley and the adrenaline rush I couldn't shake for days. To be lying if I said that experience doesn't still bother me, but I am so fortunate to mainly be haunted by the what-ifs and not the what-dids. Story 19. I almost got abducted by 5 guys in a super shady part of town really late one night, saved by a hero comedian. Back in 2004, I was a young and dumb 17-year-old country girl in the city for the first time, starting college. One night, I decided I could totally safely walk back to my dorm around 1:30 in the morning, despite not really knowing where I was. Of course, I instantly ended up wandering around a terrible part of the city. Most of the streetlights were busted out, trash everywhere, loud arguments coming from inside the dilapidated-as-hell row houses. In short, I wouldn't even want to be there in the middle of the day. A car drove up behind me and slowed down, so they were keeping pace with me for nearly an entire block. I looked over and saw 5 unsavory-looking men inside. By this point, I was approaching an intersection, and they pulled up, made a left, and stopped in the street directly in my path. I completely panicked at this point, and just stood there right in front of them. My mind went completely blank. I've never been that scared in my life. It didn't even make sense to try to run, because they would have caught me without question. I am not really sure how long I stood there, but suddenly the porch light in the house just past the car came on. A guy casually strolled outside carrying a bag of trash, and the car peeled away. I completely broke down, crying and shaking. The guy spotted me, listened to my probably incoherent story, took me inside, and gave me a soda. Then he and his roommate walked me back to my dorm. They were both lovely and invited me to check out their stand-up sometime, but unfortunately, I was too young to get into a bar. I never saw them again and don't even remember their names, but I am pretty confident that if that guy hadn't decided to take his trash out at 1 a.m. on a Saturday, my life would have taken a really crappy turn that night. Edit, I completely accept that this was totally my fault and a horribly dumb thing to do. I was extremely fortunate and am no longer that stupid. Story 20. Okay, this is 100% true. I am 23 now, and this happened about 10 years ago, so I was probably 13 or 14. Anyway, I used to skateboard all the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day, we finished skating and decided to go to the 7-Eleven to get some food and drinks before heading home. Remember, I was only 13 or 14, so we weren't driving. We skated to the 7-Eleven and planned to skate or walk back home. Anyway, we bought our drinks and left the store. We walked to the parking lot's exit, preparing to cross the highway. It's not a busy highway, since it's a small town. While we waited for the traffic light to turn red so we could cross, I looked behind me at the 7-Eleven gas pumps. I noticed a man, around 40 to 50 years old, pumping gas into his white truck. He stared at me, and before I knew it, he dropped the gas pump and jumped into his truck. He slammed on the gas and sped straight at my friends and me. He missed us, but grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend Brandon screamed, "What the hell? You frigging donghead," as the man peeled out and sped into the parking lot next to the 7-Eleven. I swear to God, he drove through a ditch. That was between the 7-Eleven's parking lot and the other parking lot and tried to run us over again. This is where it got bad. The three of us started running at full speed across the highway toward the local library, which is about 2 or 3 blocks from the 7-Eleven. When we were about half a block away, I looked back and saw the maniac speeding toward us, full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors, and I ran toward the woods. It was Sunday, so I knew the library was closed, and there was a trail in the woods that led to my backyard. Meanwhile, the maniac peeled into the parking lot and hopped out of his truck. I looked behind me before escaping into the woods, and saw him grab either a shotgun or a crowbar. I wasn't sure, since I was pretty far away and freaking out, so my vision wasn't great from the bed of his truck. I ran all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbor Tim's dad told me to get in his car because we had to go to the video store where Tim's mom worked. When I got there, I found Tim, Brandon, and 3 cops. A minute later, my mom came in, crying her eyes out, because Brandon and Tim told her they didn't know if I was alive. Everyone thought I had been captured. Tim told me he saw the guy running after me into the woods, which is scary because I thought the maniac was chasing them, not me. Anyway, he was never caught, and I spent the next 5 years worrying about every white truck I saw. I forgot the scariest part. My town is small, but it's not empty. There were plenty of people around while this was happening. I felt so helpless, running for my life, with at least 100 people nearby, and no one doing anything about it. Also, just to be clear, we didn't provoke this man at all. He tried to hit us for no reason. And that's what made it so creepy. Brandon called him a dong, but that was only after he tried to run us over. We were good kids, just trying to walk home, and we almost died, or got seriously hurt, because of it. Story 21. I woke up. The clock said 3:34 a.m. I was 17, and my bedroom was pitch black, but I heard rattling downstairs. Terrified, I quietly tiptoed to my parents' room. Weird, it was empty. Where were my parents, at 3:34 a.m.? I went upstairs to my brother's room. He was usually awake all night, but although the light was on, no one was there. So, I guessed whoever was making those noises downstairs must have been them. Why were they awake? Maybe someone had died? I went downstairs. In the middle of the living room, I saw what looked like 2 men stealing our TV. No one else was in sight. I ran upstairs as quietly as possible, shut and locked my door. Suddenly, there was banging on the door. I woke up. It was a dream, and relief washed over me. I looked at the clock. Weird coincidence. It was 3:34 a.m. I was shaking but decided to go downstairs to prove to myself that everything was fine. I went downstairs. The two men were in my kitchen, screaming at my parents and brother. I ran upstairs to my bedroom and locked the door. 10 seconds later, I heard banging. I woke up. It was 3:34 a.m. This time, I had actually woken up, and I didn't manage to fall back asleep for about 36 hours. Edit. Lots of responses about lucid dreaming here. I spent most of my teens and early 20s as a lucid dreamer, discovering the techniques after a childhood plagued by very frightening sleep paralysis. I found a message board back in 1998, where I learned to at least have fun with it. The above story wasn't a sleep paralysis experience, but it was typical of the kinds of nightmares I used to have. Weirdly enough, I rarely had nested dreams anymore, and hadn't had a successful attempt at lucid dreaming in a few years. My guess was that it had something to do with hormones. Story 22. I lived in a bizarre little house as a child. It was incredibly tall and thin, like an attached house, but freestanding, with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. It was full of quirks: 2 fully functional fireplaces, a shower stall in the center of the basement, a backyard so small you couldn't take 5 paces without hitting the fence, and an old-fashioned rope-pull dumbwaiter that led from the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that weird little place, but unfortunately it was incredibly old, and half of its charm came from the fact that it seemed to have been designed by an inarticulate conclave of lunatics. Eventually, the repair costs exceeded what my parents were willing to invest, and we had to move. Preparing for the move was a chore. I packed most of my stuff myself, and I had taken to throwing things down the dumbwaiter and shoving all my clothes so thickly into my closet that they became a single solid brick of fabric. While clearing out that closet, I came across a feature I hadn't noticed before: an attic entrance in the roof. Being an adventurous kid, I opened it up, stood on the closed brick, and began my first and last exploration into the topmost part of our weird little house. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as it should have been. The space was strung with old red Christmas lights, which still burned with leftover incandescence, and a dozen little cracks and holes peeped down into the bedrooms below. The second thing I noticed was that the place was set up for habitation. The insulation was plasticked away. There was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator that still worked when I tested it. The third thing was the bones. There were a lot of bones. I was just a kid at the time, with only a limited understanding of anatomy, but there were bones of all kinds heaped into several piles around the center of the attic. Small and large, clean and white, from every imaginable creature, haphazardly stacked into half a dozen osseous clumps. 2 of the piles were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them, and the walls nearest those charred heaps were scrawled with dark bone char messages. Mostly just smears, but the word sorry appeared more than once. That room had been sitting right above my head for 8 years while I slept. Story 23. When I was 8, my family moved from urban South Florida to a really small town in North Florida. It felt like something out of a Goosebumps book. Over the 15 years since we moved there, a lot of strange things happened, but the weirdest was when my sister moved back in with my parents. Her husband had been deployed to Afghanistan, so she was left alone with a newborn son. Not wanting to endure the soul-crushing loneliness of raising a newborn alone in a trailer in the woods, she moved back into my parents' house for a while. She said it started when the headboard of her bed would slam every now and then. Then one day she woke up because somebody was tickling her. She didn't really think about it until one night she woke my mom up by screaming, "My sister is almost 30, she's not a little kid." My mom went in and the whole bed was rocking and shaking violently up and down, side to side, like a boat going through white water. But my mom and sister have been through a lot, so they persevered. One night my sister was nursing her son when something grabbed her ponytail and started yanking her head around. My mom went into the room and very sternly, like talking to a misbehaving child, said, "I understand things are different. There's a little baby here now, and there never has been before. You're curious, I get that. But you will not touch them anymore. You can look, you can stay. You were here before us, but I swear to God you are not allowed to touch them. It stopped happening. Story 24. About a month ago, I went over to my girlfriend's house. I felt really uneasy when I entered the living room. It turned out they had replaced a china cabinet with one that belonged to her grandmother, who passed away a few months ago. Her grandmother had been bedridden in the hospital, and I never got to meet her. I felt uneasy the whole time. Being around her grandmother's furniture made me anxious and almost sad. When I told my girlfriend, she said it was probably nothing, and went to the bathroom. I walked over to the cabinet. It was about 6 feet tall, made of dark wood, with 2 doors on the sides and glass up front. A mirror covered the back. I was looking at the teacups and small baby dolls when I swore I saw someone's silhouette in the mirror behind me. I called out to my girlfriend. At that moment, I heard a shrill screech from the bathroom. I started pounding on the door. It opened and she was sitting on the floor, crying. She said she saw someone in the bathroom mirror. We booked it out of her house. No shoes, no jacket, nothing, straight to my car. I drove for about an hour or so with no destination. When I returned her to her house, her mom was sitting on the doorstep. She said she kept seeing shadows move. Nope. I'll go out of my way to make things like this happen. If someone claims their house is haunted, I want to see. If someone says they think they saw a skinwalker, my friends and I start looking. I've never found anything. But this was something else. Story 25. When I was a child, I lived in an old Victorian house, and I would always hear laughter while trying to sleep. I was an only child with a single mother, and when I was about 5 or 6, I would wake up in the middle of the night hearing laughter in the hallway. After mentioning it to my mom, she swore it was probably just the TV being left on late. One night I woke up hearing the laughter inside my room. I tried to sit up but felt like someone was holding my shoulders down. Invisible hands gripping my shoulders as I heard the laughter. I screamed my little heart out. My mom ran into my room and flicked on the bedside lamp, trying to convince me it was just a dream, until I said, "But my shoulders hurt." She lifted my t-shirt, and there were 2 adult-sized handprints on my shoulders. I honestly thought I had imagined it, and that it never happened. But the other day I mentioned it in passing to my mom, and she went completely white and said, "I don't want to remember that." Story 26. I saw a demon who seemed surprised I could see him, and my room was exorcised. Not sure if it was real or something my stressed-out teenage brain created. I was 17 and woke up in the middle of the night to see my clothes rustling in my doorway. After washing my clothes, I liked to hang dry them on my doorframe. I noticed some really gray, veiny-looking legs, and then I saw these long, pointed sticks moving through my clothes. It took me a second, but my sleepy eyes adjusted enough to see one of the most grotesque, demon-looking creatures I have ever seen. He was extremely skinny with a distended stomach. His skin was gray and veiny, and those long sticks were his fingers. His chin was long, his eyes had no lids and were unusually big. His tiny mouth was puckered and moved like he was sucking on an imaginary lollipop. His hunched back looked as though it had torn out of the strange hospital gown he was wearing. He just stared at me, and I tried to scream to wake my grandmother, who was sharing the room with me for the weekend. He wouldn't stop staring, and I stared back while trying to shake my grandmother awake. I started noticing other things about him, how large and cone-like his head was, how hairless and shriveled he looked as he stood still. I was surprised I could even see him. My grandmother woke up, looked toward the door, and he was gone. In the weeks leading up to this encounter, I had been experiencing strange things in my house, like my bedroom door slamming and locking on its own. One night, I woke up feeling several hands touching my feet and legs, followed by horrible nightmares. After the experience with this strange gray man, I told my parents and they had my room exorcised. I don't know if the exorcism actually made those horrible things stop or if it just gave me peace of mind from things I was manifesting myself. All I know is that I don't experience those things anymore, and I'll never sleep with my door open again. Story 27. When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in North Carolina. It wasn't a typical farm with fields full of beans or anything like that. It was actually a pine tree harvestery. Pine needles are a big landscaping commodity, so we basically lived in the woods and would bale the pine straw every year. The point is, my house was in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly lined longleaf pines. My living room had a huge picture window. I won't go into the architecture of the house, but it was a weird custom job built by some dentist in the 1930s. The window in the living room stretched nearly the entire length of the room, maybe 50 feet. The house was built on a subtle hill, so the living room itself sat 5 or 6 feet off the ground, giving you an angle to look out at a solid mile of pine trees. During winter, it was unsettling because you'd get just a bit of snow, enough to reflect moonlight so you could see the dogs running around at night. I'll be honest, I hated that room and that window. So now, to the relevant part. I had a cousin over for the weekend, and we were doing what kids do in the country, throwing stuff in the fireplace to see what happens. It was getting late, and the fire was dying down, so we built a big kingdom of couch cushions and blankets in the living room and got ready for bed. Nothing out of the ordinary, until we heard the dogs barking. They were really far away. The property stretches for nearly a mile, so I just assumed they were chasing off whatever animal felt like crapping in my yard. My cousin was staring out the window and not saying anything, which prompted the usual, "What's up?" He just kept staring and said he felt like he was seeing things. Naturally, I got anxious and started staring out the window too. Nothing happened for a few minutes, and he got more and more annoyed with me because I kept asking what he saw. He kept shushing me so he could focus. Then we both saw it. A shadow of a person moving from one tree to the next. Not running, not leaping, just a brisk walk from one tree to another. This was probably 100 yards out from the house. We couldn't actually tell if the person was coming closer or not, because we were dealing with moonlight reflecting off snow, slush, and ice. I guess the crazy part is that we didn't really freak out, because at that point there was still a chance we didn't actually see what we thought we saw, you know? So we just kept staring. We should have gone to wake my dad, but he's an idiot, the kind of guy who'd walk out on the patio and holler into the woods with his rifle. We were just scared enough to agree that we didn't want to taunt whatever was happening. About 3 minutes later, it happened again, but about 50 feet from where we first saw it. Another person, another tree, a few strides and they were gone. This kept happening every few minutes for the next half hour, and we just kept staring. At this point, I should mention, I didn't really have neighbors. The land surrounding our farm belonged to federal paper. I don't know who owns it now, so it was miles and miles of uncultivated trees. You don't see people around the farm unless they intend to be there. So we kept watching as these two figures appeared and vanished intermittently until finally we saw one appear but not disappear. Instead, it started running forward. We lost our crap and went to wake my dad. By the time we got into the room with my half-awake father, there was no one to be seen. We sprinted around, locking doors and windows. Keep in mind, we were out in the country with no one around, so it rarely occurred to us to lock doors. Every door was worse than the last, because you just knew that as soon as you reached it, someone would be trying to open it, although that never happened. We locked everything up, walked around the house at least 50 times to make sure no one got in without us knowing, and then convinced my dad to fall asleep in the living room with us while we stared out the window. I never understood why my dad wouldn't call the police. He always had this "we take care of our own" mentality, and calling 911 simply wasn't an option. The next day, we went out to look, and sure enough, there were footprints everywhere in the snow. We saw them between the trees, and then finally where someone had been standing right in front of the window. But as I said, I wouldn't have seen them because while I was 7 feet up in the living room, they would have been right beneath me. Story 28. I used to work as a cleaner at my school after class, so by the time I left, the roads were pretty quiet since everyone had already walked home. One day I noticed this man walking behind me, not too close but obviously following me. He was pretty creepy. His face looked like it was made of plastic, and he had a really subtle smile. The first time I saw him, I thought nothing of it. About 2 weeks later, I noticed him again, and from then on, I saw him every single day when I was walking home. I didn't tell anyone because I was 16 and I knew my parents would want to start taking me to and from school, and that wasn't cool. One weekend, I was walking to my friend's house, which was a similar route to the one I took to school. As I was turning onto the main road he usually followed me down after school, I happened to look over at a minibus parked at the bottom of the road, and I swear to God he was sitting in the driver's seat, staring through the windows at me. I called my friend and made it very obvious that I was on the phone, thinking it might deter him. But when I looked back, he was about 2 meters behind me, with that same plasticky smile. I started to sort of walk-run, and I could actually hear him doing the same, keeping the same pace and distance the whole time. I was still on the phone with my friend, and I told her to open her front door and wait for me. When I got there, I ran straight in, and we locked the door. The guy just stood outside her house for about 2 hours, smiling and staring in the window. After that, I never saw him again, and I've moved away since. But when I went back to visit my parents last weekend, that minibus was still parked in the exact same spot. Story 29. Junior year of high school. I got off a couple of bus stops early to hang out at a friend's house after school. We were playing video games when my friend's mom got a call from mine, angrily telling me to come home. I thought I was busted for not coming straight home, but she seemed particularly angry and scared about this. When I got home, my mom, sister, and my sister's friend were kind of frazzled and in shock. My mom was angrily asking where I had been and what I was doing after school. She didn't believe my story about going directly to my friend's house and being there the whole time. I was sent to my room. A few minutes later, my sister came in and asked me the same thing. I gave the same answer and asked why everyone was acting so weird and freaked out. While I was at my friend's house, my mom heard a voice calling my name from her bedroom window. When she looked outside into our backyard, she saw my sister, her friend, and a guy with no shirt on hugging my sister's friend from behind. My mom was sure it was me and went outside to reprimand me for shirtlessly hugging my sister's friend. But when my mom got outside, she only found the two of them. No guy with no shirt. They said they had been out there the whole time. My mom didn't believe them because she clearly heard a man's voice and saw the shirtless guy outside. She interrogated them about my whereabouts, convinced they were covering for me and that I was hiding somewhere. Here's the spooky part. My sister's friend had come over because she needed someone to talk to. It was the 1-year anniversary of her fiancé's death. He had offed himself. Her fiancé and I share the same name. My mom had no idea about any of this when she saw the male figure outside with them. Story 30. My dad and auntie have told me this story on separate occasions, and both accounts are exactly the same. When my dad was about 16, in the late 70s, he and my auntie were waiting in my grandparents' waiting room at the front of the house, just outside my grandparents' bedroom where my great-grandfather lay dying. The room had 3 exits, one leading to my grandparents' bedroom, one to the rest of the house, and a door leading to the front garden. There was no breeze at all, especially from anywhere inside the house. My auntie felt cold, so she closed and locked the previously ajar wooden door, then sat back down. About 3 minutes later, my grandmother let out a wail as my great-grandfather died. At that exact moment, as both my auntie and dad testify, the sturdy wooden door flew open, swung outward, and slammed shut as if someone stormed out angrily. It couldn't have been the wind. The way the door opened and closed was exactly how an enraged person would slam it. I asked them separately, and they both gave the exact same details. Story 31. We were living with my grandparents at the time. In my aunt's room was a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll converted into a lamp. The lamp would only turn on by holding the doll's cold plastic hand and raising and lowering its arm. The doll stood on a nightstand next to my aunt's bed, facing the door, greeting everyone who entered with a creepy dead-eye smile. I was alone in the house one day and wanted a blanket from my aunt's closet. Luckily for this scaredy cat, 2 important things worked in my favor. 1, it was mid-afternoon, so I didn't need the lamp's light. And 2, the closet was located immediately next to the door's entrance. Without lifting my gaze, I stared at the floor, entered the room, and turned 180 degrees. Now my back was toward the doll. I quickly swung open the closet door and reached down for a blanket when suddenly something about the room felt different, brighter. The light was on and the peach fuzz hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I froze for what felt like an eternity. My survival instinct kicked in. I wanted to run screaming in horror, but before that I still had to look. Man, I wish I hadn't looked. As I turned to exit the room, I lifted my stupid head and confirmed that the doll's hand was raised, and it was pointed directly at me. That traumatizing vision has burned in my brain since I was 13. Much uneasy, creepy memory. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.